record, and I'm going to put mine in speaker view for the recording so that it's all on Rebecca. But welcome. I'm excited. We have some people that have just been on for the very first time. And so welcome to our virtual happy hours that have these incredible speakers who have special, I keep using the word superpower this week, special superpowers that the rest of us don't have. Really excited about having Rebecca Friedman today. I am very fortunate because I get to work with Rebecca every single day in the real estate space now because she shifted her, I would say, 2-decade career in publishing in the literary side of the world into real estate. Yet I've learned a lot from her on writing books and navigating that world. Have a little side project myself right now that she's been really insightful with. But the other thing that I think is really cool to note is, her background, she started with big agencies, which she can tell you a little bit more about, but then she created her own business. And I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs that watch these replays or jump on the happy hour. And Rebecca created a business that now sustains itself with a pretty hefty income. So in addition to just being a genius about the literary world, she's also incredibly stellar when it comes to creating businesses. So Rebecca, thank you for taking time to jump on this happy hour with us. Everyone, I think, well, there are a couple new people. This is meant to be interactive. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them. And also feel free to use the chat function. And if Rebecca's presenting and I see something that's in the middle, I'm completely comfortable interrupting Rebecca. I do it all the time. We're good friends. So with that, I'm going to let Rebecca share a little bit more about herself and then kind of dive into some general tips about writing your nonfiction book. Rebecca, take it away.
Okay, so my background, I've been a literary agent and had my own literary agency for about 6 years, and I also have a publishing company. We'll go into that in a minute, but I want to talk about more of the traditional publishing market. I about almost 20 years ago started working as an apprentice for some other literary agents. It's a very old-fashioned world where you work for people for a long time, gain their trust, edit their clients' books, and then eventually when they think you're ready, you end up having your own clients as well. So I was at Sterling Lord and some other really great agencies where I kind of cut my chops and learned the trade. So there's a few different sort of verticals, if you will. There's nonfiction, fiction, and then children's. And so in each of those different verticals, there's different things and different sort of rules, if you will, of the game. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about each one, but if people aren't interested in one or the other, I don't need to talk about it. And then I thought I would talk a little bit about how to find the right agent for you. And then I thought we could also talk about whether or not you should self-publish or not, because a lot of my career in the last 6 years has been developing my own self-publisher because there's a lot of money to be made and also a connection with your audience that you don't necessarily have if you go through a traditional publisher. So those are the sort of different things I wanted to talk about. So to start with nonfiction, you can sell to a traditional publisher, Random House, Simon & Schuster, Penguin, etc., with a proposal. And we can go deeper if you guys want, and I can answer any questions about what those proposals look like. A lot of people sort of like to write more of the book and sort of back in that way into the proposal. Some people prefer to do a proposal and then write the book afterwards. Publishers know that if you write the proposal before the book, which is normally what people do, you're not going to have the same exact book as you have in the proposal because, of course, the writing process fine-tunes your ideas. But it's definitely, you need to have a sustained argument or sustained narrative in that proposal so that the publisher and the editors and all the marketing people at the company read the proposal and think, you know what, we can get behind this story, this idea, this person, and we think we can, do something with this. So nonfiction is also very dependent on your position. So for example, if you want to write a business book, but you don't have a successful business, publishers are not going to want to publish the book. It doesn't mean, however, that you don't have something to say. Maybe your business is successful to you. Maybe you have an amazing Etsy shop, and people who work at Etsy or have other shops at Etsy would want to read your book because all your tips and tricks would help them. But that's not going to be the kind of business book, unless you're the head of Etsy, that a publisher is going to want to publish. So you kind of have to differentiate, and you can try agents, and you can see that way if you can get an agent and they think that they can then sell the book to a publisher. That can be a good way to assess whether or not your book has that kind of legs. But I don't think it means that your book's not valuable. It just has to be a book that an agent thinks they can sell to a publisher, and the publisher is looking at the bottom line. So that's just something kind of in a quick snippet of how to kind of look at the whole market. Because if you are really good at what you do and it's very niche, that could be something that you self-publish and you could reach your audience. And what else? I mean, you want to write a book that people read. So I think that's success. Well, I guess what I'm saying is success can look very different depending on what the book is. So that's nonfiction, and we can talk more about that. Then fiction, unless you're a known novelist, you cannot write a proposal. You have to write the whole novel. And usually the process is that someone writes a novel, they workshop it with a group, then they send it to their agent, then their agent edits it, and eventually everyone thinks it's ready. And then the agent sends out the book to different editors, who then somebody buys it, and then they edit the book. So there's a lot of stages, and you just have to keep pushing at it. I think something very important for fiction is finding a group of peers online. It doesn't have to be in person, and now it can't be in person. But finding somebody that you can connect with, that you admire their writing, and they admire yours, and you guys can push each other to be better. Now, when someone edits your stuff, you don't have to take every note that they make, but you have to feel like, okay, this person says that this character development isn't good, or this part of the plot doesn't make sense to them. And if you start to think, it's a very humbling process, and it's really hard, but you have to realize, okay, if enough people have said this and I trust their opinion, how can I make this novel better based on this feedback? Then there's young adult. Young adult works very similarly to adult, but I guess the biggest difference is you need to realize and know from reading young adult what's appropriate. So for example, a lot of young adult books are really pushing boundaries now. There might be drug use, there might be bullying, anorexia, alcoholism. There could be a lot of things, but it's like, how is it handled in the book? And it's not that it's necessarily handled in like a Pollyanna-ish way. It's usually very honest, but it doesn't glorify it. And it's also like, how do they, if the characters decide they want to have sex, for example, like what is the language of sex for a teenage book versus for an adult book? So those are sort of the kinds of things that people are going to be looking for. Middle grade, the same thing. They can tackle real subjects, but it has to be age appropriate. The other thing about children's, from picture books to middle grade, is that you really need to know, how long are these books? How many pictures are in these books? So you have to look at competitive titles to know those things. So for example, a picture book is always 32 pages. A middle grade book is about 100. So you don't want to write something that there's not a market for already. If you want to get with a traditional publisher, you want to look and say, okay, I'm not going to write a 500-page middle grade book because there are no 500-page middle grade books, and no one's going to buy this from me. And it's not that someone couldn't write a good 500-page middle grade book. It's that there's a lot of things down the path of publishing something like that. It's more expensive to print something like that. There's no room at Barnes & Noble for a 500-page middle grade book. There's just so many different kinds of considerations a publisher has to make something work. So that's kind of the broad overview. I want to talk about one more thing. I want to talk about getting an agent and the best advice I can give about that. And then I want to take questions. So if you write a book and you read, you know which people like to read books that are like your book by looking in the back of the book and the acknowledgments of what book that is most like your book. So you should definitely target agents who have already repped books like yours. Now, it doesn't need to be identical. You shouldn't, if you write a book about a foster parent who is in Antarctica and you read a book about a foster parent in Antarctica, the agent is not going to want to do that book again. But if it has the same kind of feeling, or the writing's kind of similar, or it's the same genre, you have to, that's the best way to find an agent for you. And I think that mentioning that you've read this other book to the agent and saying that you're picking them because of X, Y, or Z book, as long as the book isn't something like The Hunger Games, or, you know, if you're trying to get 50 Shades of Grey agent, or, you know, you can't say the biggest book that they've done because it doesn't feel like you've done the research on them. But if you do a book that's good that they've done that is a little less successful, then they feel like, okay, this person spent the time to find me. I'm going to spend the time to read what they have to say. So it's a better way of getting your query noticed. There's plenty of classes and things online about how to write a really good query letter. Also happy to talk about that. But I think that's a kind of a good overview. Oh, one more thing for the overview. So let's say you write a book and you're like, I don't think this book is the right kind of book for a traditional publisher, or I don't want to wait for an agent, or I don't want to wait the 2 years it takes for after I find an agent and the publisher buys the book and then they publish it. They wait 2 years to do it. I think my book is timely. I have an audience of people that I can tell about this book right now. You can always self-publish that book. It is not expensive to self-publish a book. I do think that you should still be very professional about it. You should still get a professional cover made. You should still have a copy edited. You should still have it edited because you want this book to really be good. But on the other hand, there's a lot of ways to get direct to market now. And I think that a lot of people poo-poo that idea, and there's no reason to do that. There's really a lot of readers who are happy to read independent authors' books. So that's sort of the big overview of the market. And now I'd love to take questions.
Rebecca, I think that would be so helpful to walk through what you should do with a proposal for a nonfiction book.
Okay, so a proposal is about 20 to 30, 45-page document. It has an overview, which really talks about the main thrust of what the proposal is. And we can go into more details about that if people have ideas that they want to discuss. But that's usually like 3 to 5 pages. And it's sort of like the whole either argument or narrative encapsulated. Really like, so someone reads that and they know what they're getting into. Then there's a chapter by chapter description. You also depends on the kind of book that you're doing for nonfiction. Do business books usually have 10 chapters? Do they usually have 20 chapters? It depends on what kind of business book you're doing. So you need to know, or is this a memoir? You need to look at books and say, okay, they usually have 15 chapters. That's this particular genre. I'm going to do 15 chapters. And you write a paragraph description in the same voice that you would write the book. And this whole thing has to be in the voice that you would use for the book. And you write a paragraph by paragraph description of each chapter. And then you write a bio of yourself, and you include anywhere where you've been published or important, important things about your professional life. Then you do a marketing section where you write about how you can market the book to your sphere or connections that you have. And you also write competing titles, other titles that have done well, that are like your book but not identical to your book, but they have to be, again, books that are not, #1 New York Times bestsellers. Now, this proposal format that I just told you, not everybody does it exactly the same way. Some agents will tell you to do it in a different order. They might want, uh, you to focus on more on one part or then another part, but that is sort of the big kind of generalized overview of what a proposal looks like.
Awesome. That's really cool.
So I am happy, any questions, they can be very specific about your whatever you are working on. I don't mind you saying like, this happens in my story or this happens in my nonfiction and how do I handle this? Go for it.
Hey, Rebecca, I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about reaching out to the literary agents with the like query letter, how do you reach out to them? I mean, do you call them? Do you just email? Like, how do you try to get in touch with them?
Most agents have a preferred way of being reached out to. It's not phone calls. And you can see on their website, they'll tell you how to submit to them, and you should definitely do exactly what they say. So for example, my website always said to write to a specific email address. It wasn't my email address. And I think I wanted like 3 chapters of your, if it was fiction or if it was a proposal, I wanted the whole thing, or I don't remember what my thing was. I didn't really care so much like about exactly if people follow directions. But for example, my assistant who vetted everything cared a lot. She was like, these people don't follow the rules. And she would like throw them into the trash. So it's all digital usually. Some people will say they're closed for submissions. So you have to wait until they open again for submissions. A lot of agents are on Twitter. So another way to like kind of butter people up is to be on Twitter and interact with them before you send something to them. But you can't be too obvious about it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, sorry, I was mute. Yeah, that's great. Thanks,
Okay.
Rebecca.
Of course. Anybody else have any questions?
So in the beginning, when you were talking about, you might have a good Etsy shop on Etsy, but your book wouldn't be here because you don't own all of Etsy.
Yep.
So that's an analogy we can all relate to. Can you get a little bit more specific about where we might be in our business versus the global scope of the world and how to determine the two of those?
Yeah, that is really, really hard. And it's really a case by case basis because there are stories of someone who did something amazing in a very small way, but created a lot of change. And we all want to read that book. So it's hard for me to say, it's really hard for me to say. I think it would really depend on the author's platform. And it would depend on the publisher. And I don't know, like if your organization was pretty big and you were the head of people, let's say at that organization, and you had really helped grow an organization to hundreds and hundreds of people, I think that is not the example that I gave the small Etsy shop. But I don't know, but then there could be a story like, for example, I heard an interview 2 days ago of this guy who had a small mom and pop restaurant, and it's literally mom and pop. Like it's his mom and his dad and him.
Love it.
In this little restaurant in LA. And he was on a food interview that my friend's doing, who's a food writer in LA, talking about how they're trying to, take care of everyone during this time. And they really want to be there for their community and have hot homemade meals, but also his parents are really old, but his parents are also Armenian. So they survived the Armenian genocide. So they're like, what is this virus? They think it's like they're like, we were in Russia, in Siberia, like walking through it's hard for them to understand this like silent enemy that they don't see. And I could see that if he was a really good writer and had a really good voice, even though he has a tiny restaurant that is not big by any case, but if he had a good voice, I mean, he did speaking voice, but if he had a good written voice that told the story of his family and home cooking and what it's like to make Armenian food and kebabs, I could see that being a book. it just kind of, it's like, does it have that little magic sparkle thing or does it not?
You know what? Knowing most of the people on here, I think we get the magic sparkle thing. So the like
Yeah.
it factor. In
Yeah.
that case, like a story from the heart, like there's a story of what they went through and then the story of how they're serving.
Right. And there's kind of like levels to it. It's dynamic. It's not a straightforward thing. Like sometimes with nonfiction, the editor will say, this could have been an article. Like I could have read this in an article. It's like, what makes this need to be a book? So that's another thing to think about. Elizabeth.
Okay, so my question is, and following your story you had here was, what if you have an idea but you're not quite sure? Is there a safe person to kind of test it out with before you do a proposal and go that far into the process?
Me. I think I am your safe person.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be now. I can give you guys my email. I'm happy to talk to you anytime.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Because you don't want to talk to just anybody. You don't want it to be a friend who doesn't know the business, because it depends on the friend. Like if a friend is a real is like, the kind of friend who's like, yeah, you should do that. Maybe they're a really nice friend and they really believe in you, but they don't know anything.
Yeah.
And then, or they could be a really pessimistic friend who, you need someone who has been in the business.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Anybody writing romance in this room?
Sharon?
Sharon, are you writing romance?
Sharon, you should.
Oh, Rebecca, I mean, I should write some romance.
You should write. Yeah.
I mean, it would be such a tragic story.
No, it wouldn't. So that's another good example. Like if you read romance books, they all have to have a happily ever after. Every single one of them. There are rules of every genre. So of course, Sharon's book is going to have an HEA, a happily ever after. Or a murder mystery has to have a body pretty soon into the book, because otherwise it doesn't fit the genre. So there's little small subtle rules. Usually if you're writing a book in a specific genre, you usually know it. And that's and then there's, of course, there's women's fiction and there's literary fiction, which is more about the voice, not always about the story. So that kind of depends too.
What do you mean the voice versus the story?
So the story is like the plot, but the voice is the writing. And it doesn't have to be like purple prose that's really flowery. It has to be really good writing. There's people, let me just make sure yeah, you can take it. Sorry. There's people who, some imprints in the big publishers who really focus on more literary books, more, kind of, they're not genre. I like literary books that are well written, but also have propulsive forward motion with the plot. But some people, and not so much anymore, they, used to publish more books where people didn't really do that much, but it was like you got to know them really well, sort of like character books. But I think those are a little boring. Like it's, yeah, Elizabeth, sorry.
I wanted to ask about ghostwriting.
Yes.
How often do
I know
people
a lot
have
about
ghostwriters? How do you decide on that?
So it really depends. Are we talking about nonfiction or fiction?
Either.
Okay, so for nonfiction, there's a lot of times, and I've done this a lot in my career, where there'll be an expert, like the head of a company. They have the ideas. They're not necessarily the best writer, but they want to do the book, and they'll hire someone to ghostwrite the book for them. And then you do a collaboration agreement, and the fee depends on who the writer is and all that kind of stuff. Or the gentleman I was just that Armenian genocide cook guy, like the one who was interviewing him is a client of mine who writes a lot of cookbooks. So like just because you're a good chef doesn't mean you can write a book.
Yeah.
So often cookbooks are co-written.
Yeah.
Where the chef has a lot of input, but a writer really puts it into the right words.
Yeah.
Fiction. So a lot of like Nancy Drew, for example, Nancy Drew was not written by Carolyn Keenan. So she wrote like the first few, and then they started hiring a lot of people. And still, Nancy Drew has new books, and she's not writing them. She's probably dead. So that's like packaging, where a company, or like the Gossip Girl, Alloy Entertainment does a lot of packaging. So that is where there's either like kind of a brand name, or like James Patterson, it will say like James Patterson with blah blah blah. It means blah 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 wrote it, not James Patterson. If you were gonna, there's a difference. So there's ghostwriting, and then there's pseudonyms. So a lot of romance clients that I have write under a pseudonym because they grew up in a very conservative environment, or they, go to a very conservative church, and they don't want people to know that they write sort of smutty, romancy, porny stuff. So there's a lot of that going on too, but they write their own books. They just use a different names.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. BK Shattuck, do you have a question?
Is BK a writer?
Or maybe Leslie Moore or Cameron Martin or Sabfi?
It's Sabra, but yeah,
Sorry.
no question right now.
Okay.
Well, so Rebecca, you talked about how do you determine, you covered this a little bit, but go into more detail about the self-publishing route.
Oh yeah.
So if you're going to publish traditionally or self-publish, in either case, you still really need to focus on who's going to read your book and how to get the book to them. Because even traditional publishers, I'm sorry to say, are not very good at it. It's really easy for them when someone's really well known, like Michelle Obama's book, everyone wanted to buy that book. But when it's someone who's lesser known, I don't usually feel like they have a really good PR plan that makes people want to buy it. And I think a lot of that, it's better if you don't expect them to have a good plan and you're pleasantly surprised when they do something right for the PR part of it. So in either case, you're going to need to do a lot of your own publicity and use your own connections. And I mean, remember that book a few years ago? I don't know if you guys read that book, Henrietta Lacks. It was about a Black woman who they used some of her blood to like figure out cancer treatments. And I don't know, it was a long time ago. The book was a New York Times bestseller. And the way that they did that is that she, the writer, and her dad called every single independent bookstore state by state and talked to them about the book and how important it was. And there's an article about how she did it. So like, you really have to have some like real staying power to get your book out there, unless you're already known. So in either case, you need to think about that. If you're going to self-publish, getting a cover done, getting it formatted correctly for Amazon, for iBooks and all the other e-stores, and even to get it formatted so that it can be a paperback is really simple, and it really doesn't cost very much, and I'd be happy to give anybody those kind of resources too. But were you talking more about how to know if you should go to a publisher or self-publish? I'm on a call right now. Okay, sorry. What, Holly, were you talking more about like how to know if you should publish or go with a publisher? Okay. I think if it's your dream to be published by a big publisher, then you should go for it. It can be a lot of work and a lot of rejection, and even the top most talented published people have been rejected over and over again. And as an agent, I've been rejected so many times. I read a book, I'll fall in love with it, and it will take me I sold a novel. It took me 4 years to sell this novel because people thought it was too weird and nobody wanted it. And finally somebody wanted it and they paid $100,000 for it. So it's like, it just takes one agent and then one editor to like it. The editor who likes it has to really champion it in-house too. They have to get the marketing people behind them, the publicity people behind them, their publisher. So, but at the end of the day, you really just need one agent and one editor to love it to make it happen. So yeah, if that's your dream, you should go after it. I do think people put a lot of credence into this like idea that you need someone else to tell you something's good, which I don't like that, because our culture, it's very specific people in New York. Most of them have a specific background, and it's it's what they're reading and what they're thinking about is what's getting published. But if you're, so that doesn't mean that your book written from Texas isn't good. So you have to, the gatekeepers of this community are all mostly in New York, and they're mostly living a New York life. So you have to keep that in mind. Maybe your story is not for them. It doesn't mean other people won't want to read it.
So then if you are going the self-publishing route, what steps do you take?
So first you need to, I am on a call with a bunch of people. Sorry.
Rebecca's a mom to two beautiful girls.
They're just amazing, let me tell you. So if you are going to self-publish, you should look at other people who've self-published in your genre, and you should stalk them. And you should see, what are they doing? What does their Facebook look like? What does their Instagram look like? What does their Twitter look like? How can I market effectively like they are? And that's the same thing goes for publishing traditionally too. If you're writing a book, I read a book recently about a girl who grew up in Africa because her parents were like scientists, and they studied baboons. And she grew up in this like little sliver of a place in Zimbabwe, and they studied baboons, and that's how she grew up. And half the year she lived there, and half the year in Philadelphia. And now she's like an etymologist, I think, at some university. But anyway, like if I was her, I would say to her, okay, what are other books that are about the outdoors and like, written by doctors, but also like really about crazy childhoods in Africa? And I can think of a bunch of books that I read about crazy childhood in Africa, and then she could look at what they're doing to get the word out. Where did they speak? What events did they speak at? Who blurbed their book? Who wrote on the back of their book? Who had that person on to, media? And if people are well known, not again E.L. James or J.K. Rowling well known, but like medium well known, they have a list of all their media appearances on their websites. So you already know who's interested by that. So it's a lot about stalking. Become a stalker.
I love that. Rebecca, I have a question about ghostwriters.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that as a way to go to write your book? And then how do you find them? And is there any like stigma around that?
So it really depends on what kind of book we're talking about in terms of writing your book. So I think there is not a stigma when it's an expert, like a chef or the head of a company. There's definitely a stigma about it in other places, I would say. But you never have to tell anybody. If you can sign a non-disclosure agreement with the ghostwriter and never tell anyone if you don't want to. So then there's no stigma. So it really just depends on the type of book. Yeah, does that answer your question, or is there?
Yeah, and then how do you like find them? Like if that's the route you wanted to go, how would you find a ghostwriter?
It really depends on what kind of book. So if it was like, an older person who just wants to write their life story, let's say, there's a lot of companies that have really good writers who will help you get down your life story. We call it's more of like a vanity project, they're called. Even that kind of sounds rude and stigma-ish, but anyway, it's called a vanity publisher. But let's say you wanted to write, you had a great, mystery idea, you had it all plotted out, but you don't think you're a good writer, but your story is amazing and you think you have a good way to publish it or sell it, or that kind of thing. There's something called Upwork, which I found ghostwriters on Upwork. And then once you find a good ghostwriter, they usually know other ghostwriters because they a lot of traditionally published books don't get big advances. So you write a book for, let's say, a teenage book. It's your debut book, and you got paid $10,000 to write it, and you already wrote it, and you get paid $10,000. So it's not very much. So for supplemental income, a lot of those writers will ghostwrite. But like, it depends on the book. I know a ton of ghostwriters. So if you told me, oh, I want someone to ghostwrite this, I would tell you who I thought would be good. And then what I do for the romance, for example, that I publish, I write out the outline, and then I have them read, send in a sample if they're the first. If I've never worked with them before, I'll have them send in a sample of like the first chapter, the opening of the chapter, and maybe like a sex scene, because that's really important for romance, and I need to make sure that they can do the sex well, and that they can also write like feelings. But if it was a murder mystery, I'd have them write like, the killing part and something else. So it just depends. Anybody else have any other questions?
So I have a question in an area that we haven't really talked much about in terms of the space of self-development, business development.
Yep.
And it seems like with a lot of those books, there's a ton of books out there kind of around the same topics and even the same angle. So I'm just interested if you find that space intriguing, do you kind of let your content and advice be the center of what you provide, or do you start with your personality and your vibe and kind of get a following and some people to kind of endorse your thought process before you start into writing and perhaps trying to publish something?
So I think, hold on, let me just close the door because it's getting a little loud downstairs. 1 second.
Okay.
So I think, Melissa, this is a really good question. I think it gets to the heart of how to build a platform. So you really need a lot of people who are going to want your book. And at the end of the day, coming out with a book and never having communicated any of these thoughts via blog, via Twitter, via Facebook, you're really not, excuse me, I'm on a important call right now. Thanks, guys. Sorry. You're really not going to have an audience if you don't create this kind of relationship with readers ahead of time. A lot of people think that blogging is stupid, but it's actually not. People really are looking for information about different things, and if you learn a little SEO and have comprehensive information about things, that people start to say, oh, this woman really knows about X, Y, and Z subject, and you're consistent, and every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or just every Friday you post something, people then start to look for it and you publicize it, and then that's a really good way to get a following and sort of also hone your ideas. What you can say, oh, I wrote this blog entry and only 10 people read it, but I wrote this one and 100 people read it. And that also helps you figure out what's the best book to write based on that. So I think, start first building the audience, and then sort of move more into the book space. Does that help, Melissa?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, of course. I think, Leslie, were you about to ask a question?
I was going to ask if you have any different advice for poetry, or how you would go around about publishing a book of poetry.
So I haven't ever done poetry. And I think that it's a very distinct market. I think you should look at the other, just like I said earlier about who are the agents of these poets, people who are like you. There was that woman who did really, really well with her poetry. Do you know who I'm talking about? She was a New York Times bestseller.
Passed away?
No, not Mary Oliver.
Yeah, Mary Oliver.
Yeah, she was much more commercialized.
Okay.
I'll try to think of her name by the end of this, because I feel like she might have been self-published at first, which can happen. It can happen that you can have some huge following because of, by the way, all of this, there is always a dose of luck in this business. You never know what is going to work for somebody. So, and you don't know what's going to catch fire. So that's what's kind of fun about the business on one hand, because some unknown person can become an overnight success. I mean, it can happen that they're a huge success. There is a little bit of like a roll of the dice thing going on. But obviously along that, you should try to set yourself up for success. I wonder, I don't really know where people share their poems either. So I think that would be something else to look into.
There's all sorts of like, I've always wondered if where you just publish one poem instead of a collection, it's so much of it though seems like those like top 40 lawyer of the year thing. Like, are you paying to have it in there? Or is it like, how do you find out who's legitimate and who's not?
There are like, if you got your poem into the New Yorker,
right.
But there are other places like that. Like there are places that do short stories that are really, really good. In the past, I would say like go to a Barnes and Noble and look at the literary, magazines. I'm trying to think where you could figure that out now. I bet that there's like some kind of thing online where you can figure out the best places to publish poetry. And like in the New York, for example, there's like Shouts and Murmurs. So something really interesting about these places is if you have a really good poem or a really good, spoof, which is like Shouts and Murmurs. I have a client who wrote to them a few times, but they were really, really, really good. So you're not sending anything that's not top notch. And eventually, the editor got to know her, and now she's published by Shouts and Murmurs in the New Yorker. She just wrote something about COVID and reimagined every board game and what it would mean, like what would be the goals of the board game in COVID. And it was kind of funny, but like, if you have really good work and you believe in it, you should send it to people and start to make a relationship with them. So, right. Yeah. And like, think about poets that you like that are alive and find out where, Google them and see where they're publishing.
Yeah. The same advice for anything else, but yeah.
Exactly. Okay. It really, really works. It really shows you what's out there. And it shows, if you're interested in them because you like them and you think that their work is, has similarity to your work, it's very helpful to do that.
Okay. I'm mostly asking for my husband, who has written a book of poetry about physics principles. I feel like this has an audience of 4, but he really likes to hand it out.
Like, I can see that having more legs than an audience of 4. I mean, there's so many people reading those books like, what is that book that Astrophysics Changed My Life or something? I mean, I think that there's more interest in that. And that's physics is the most like hallucinogenic science there is. If you are thinking a lot right now about like what's the meaning of life and existential thoughts, that I think physics actually, I don't know, and energy. Yeah, there's something. I think there could be something there.
Well, he's really smart and creative, so I bet they're brilliant.
Well, physics is the most nuts, interesting scientists. So, yeah, I think there could be something there.
Cool.
Hey, Sharon.
Sorry, I was being super whiny, so I'm playing with her while I listen.
I like it.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
I've got a question, but I'm not going to turn my video on because I'm in my pajamas and it's not a good look. Hello. So my question is about format. So I've got an idea that can work as a combination of bits of prose, bits of poetry, illustrations, that kind of thing. I don't know if you guys have ever read Paul Arden's book, Whatever You Think the Opposite, but a book that you can open on any page and be inspired by. And I was talking to someone, yes, whatever you think the opposite.
Look that up.
I absolutely love that book because literally on any kind of down day, you can open the book and just be inspired by it by reading one page. And I absolutely love that idea. And I've kind of carried that around with me at times in my life when I haven't been feeling, on top form, and opened it on random pages on the tube and things and just felt so much better. And my book idea is in its very early stages, but is along a similar line to that. And I was speaking to a friend of mine who's published a romance book recently. And she knows a lot more about this process than I do. And she was talking about format and saying how much better it is to approach people with a novel rather than a more unusual format like the one I mentioned. What would you say about that, about changing the layout of the book entirely in order to fit the audience?
I mean, she's right if it's not spectacular. So if you can do what he did and it's spectacular, it's okay to fuck with the genre and layout of things.
Mm-hmm.
All about, there are rules and then rules are meant to be broken, but if they're gonna be broken, it has to be really fucking good. That's sort of what I would say. I don't know if that helps you.
That does help. That does help.
Come out, like, so being safe is not always the answer. Really going for it if you think that you have something like what he's doing. I mean, did you ever see that book by Leanne Shopton? It was called Is She Pretty?
No, I haven't, but I'm going to write that down right now.
Really, it's a little bit more depressing and not exactly what you're saying, but there's something similar in that there were illustrations of different women, and basically there was not very many words, but the idea of the book was that she's talking to an ex-boyfriend. I mean, this is how I thought it was. And basically comparing herself to every single one of these pictures, illustrations.
Right.
Like, but there's no other book like that.
Yeah.
But it's a very meaningful book when you read it, because you're like, oh, haven't all of us had situations where we compared ourselves to somebody else? Oh, it wasn't Isn't She Pretty? It's like, is it called Isn't She Pretty, or Was She Pretty, or anyway, it like really captured that human feeling of comparing yourself when you're the ex-girlfriend and they're dating. So, there's always a chance, I think, to do something different and exciting. So that's what I would say.
Okay, no, that's really good advice. Thank you.
Of course, my pleasure.
Anybody else? These are great questions.
And Holly, if you want to, I can share my email now if you guys want.
Yeah, I can actually give you an attendee list so that you can reach out to them and they can correspond with you. And the other thing that I think is really neat, so Rebecca, you transitioned from this world into real estate. There's members of your team on the Zoom with us today. So just give us a quick update about what you're doing now and how you're also still keeping your toe in publishing.
Yeah, so about a year and a half ago, a little bit more than that, I moved to Austin, and I have a company so I have the literary agency, but I haven't been taking on a lot of clients because I was getting frustrated at how slow it is. And I would sell a book and I would love the book so much and they'd pay a lot of money, but then nothing would happen and no one would read the book. And it was very depressing. So then I started publishing my own romance books, not books that I wrote, but books I made up the story, hired ghostwriters, and published them to a real success starting about 5 or 6 years ago. And that business, I have the same editors, the same writers, the same everything. So it was really, really running. And I was like, I need to learn something new. I've bought houses for myself before and like rented them out and, did a little investing in New York and a little bit in LA, but never on a bigger scale. And so when I started thinking about investing, then I started thinking, oh, maybe I want to become a real estate agent because I would save commission if I was the agent. And then I thought, you know what, if I want to be a real estate agent, I should actually be good at being a real estate agent. And I thought the way that I learned to be a literary agent and sort of learned everything was from learning from other people. And, you can read as much as you want, but for me, there's nothing like having, hands-on experience with really talented people and whatever you're wanting to learn how to do. So then I was very lucky and I met Holly, and then Holly told me about this team, the Booker Group. And I joined the team in September, and Sharon and Holly Northup were here and Zane's here. And basically I'm learning so much on the job while getting my own clients. And I've loved it. I really love it. So that's a very new space for me to be in. It's similar in a lot of ways to being a literary agent, actually, because as a literary agent, you have clients who have this baby that they love and they've worked their butt off to, make, and it's really emotional and important to them. And as being a real estate agent, you have clients who are about to put the most money that they've ever put down on anything before. So it's also very emotional for them. So you're sort of meeting people in the same sort of, tricky spot, not necessarily bad. It can be a great spot in life, but it's filled with a lot of emotion. So there's a lot of client relationship stuff that is very similar. And then there's a lot of negotiation stuff that's very similar, because as a literary agent, you sell to a publisher, you hope that more than one person will want it. There's a lot of multiple offer situations where you're, trying to figure out who should be right for your client. Same thing here in the Austin market is so hopping. So it's like either you have a seller who has to look at all these different offers and figure out who to accept, or you have a buyer really trying to get their offer accepted. So it's been similar and different. There's a lot to learn still for me, but I'm really loving it. And it's fun to kind of take those skills that I've developed over the last 20 years and move them on to something else.
Well, we are loving having you do that and learning from you. Y'all, so yeah, Rebecca will reach out to all of you just as a quick thank you.
That's my email, and really there's no question that's stupid. I think one other thing I would like to say before we get off is that making a community of whatever kind of book you're writing and finding other writers who are doing that and kind of being in the trenches together. I have a quick story about that. E.L. James, for example. So I have some really good friends in LA who were really good friends with her because after Twilight came out, they all read Twilight together and they all met writing fan fiction together, like making it kind of dirtier than Twilight was. And they wrote all of these stories together and became very good friends. And so a lot of the romance people I represent are very good friends with her, but they all kind of grew up together. They're all successful. Obviously, most of them are not. No one's as successful as E.L. James, but they're all successful and all helped each other get there. And they all wrote, and critiqued each other's work. And that kind of community is sort of, and then now when one of them, publishes a book, the other ones kind of lift them up. So it's really important to know other writers in your genre.
I love that. Y'all, it was so great to see everyone. Rebecca, thank you. I love every time I get to pick your brain about this topic. You provide so much value, and we know you're doing that for your clients and right now for your neighbors. Rebecca is actually going to the grocery store on behalf of all the little old people that live around her and does all these sweet things. So thank you. Friday.
Safe and takes care of themselves and washes their hands. I just read a really interesting or a video from the doctor in New York City. And he basically said, we don't have to be so scared about going to the grocery store as long as we don't touch our faces. Just don't touch your face. And he said, even wearing a mask, it's not about keeping things in or out because they don't really think it's aerosolized. They say it just helps you not touch your face because we all touch our face so much. So just don't touch your face. That's the last thing I'll say.
Good nugget. And the esthetician that did skincare one-on-one, our friend Lisa, would be to hear you say that. So Friday, if y'all don't have the link, I'll send it out because we do have some new people. We're having Sanitize Your House on Friday.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And next week we're having Do the Perfect Blowout. Zane, I know you're not going to want to miss that one. But Rebecca, thank you so much. Y'all all have a great evening. And thanks for spending time.
Everybody. I hope everyone's good. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.